I had 6 minutes before a meeting, so I opened my phone. One political clip, then another, then a third one, cut to make the other side look ridiculous. 10 minutes later, I hadn't learned much. I just felt more certain that people I'd never met were dangerous. I'm Carl Kim. Welcome to Interconnected. The question today is whether the feed is showing us what we already believe or quietly changing the emotional world in which we decide what to believe. I talked with a woman I'll call Jenny. She's an archetype built from several real conversations and experiences. She thought she was using social media to stay informed. Then she realized she was spending more time imagining her opponents than understanding them. And that realization didn't make her feel free, it made her feel watched. Here's the common story: people are polarized because people are tribal, because political parties are fighting, because cable news discovered outrage a long time ago, because humans have always sorted themselves into groups. Then the algorithm came along and notices. You click on one thing, it shows you one more things like it. You watch a debate clip, it gives you another debate clip. You follow one commentator, it finds you 10 more. The system is a mirror, maybe an efficient mirror, maybe an annoying mirror, but still a mirror. That explanation feels right because it matches how the feed feels: personalized, responsive, convenient. You make a choice, and the system follows your lead. It also feels right because polarization existed long before recommendation systems. People were sorting themselves by party, religion, geography, race, class, and media habits before anyone was building an infinite scroll. So the algorithm is easy to blame, maybe too easy. But then I started looking at what the systems are actually designed to do, and the story got harder to hold because the feed may not be inventing our political identities. It may be deciding which parts of those identities get activated over and over again. Let's start the investigation with the assumption most of us carry. Recommendation systems mostly give us more of what we already like. That's the bargain. You tell the platform what interests you, the platform saves you time. You don't have to search for every article, every video, or every person worth following. The system learns your habits and does the work for you. That sounds harmless, and sometimes it is harmless. If I watch a video about repairing a bicycle, I'd probably want another video about repairing a bicycle. If I listen to one jazz album, I may appreciate a recommendation for another jazz album. The system is useful because it predicts what I'll want next. That prediction can feel like a service. So when we apply the same logic to politics, the story seems straightforward. I already have beliefs, I already have fears, I already have people I trust and people I don't. The platform simply helps me find material that fits. That's the common understanding. And I carried some version of it too. I knew that platforms could be manipulative. I knew they wanted my attention, but I still imagined the user as the first mover. I choose. The system responds. Then I notice the verbs. We talk about the feed as if it is, quote, showing us content. But showing is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A platform may have millions of possible things to show me. It only chooses a few. Then it orders them. Then it keeps track of what I pause on, what I share, what I argue with, what I replay, and what makes me come back tomorrow. That is more than reflection. It's selection. Still, selection alone doesn't prove political influence. A library selects books. A newspaper selects stories. A friend selects what to send you. The real question is what the system rewards. And here's where the first crack appears. The platform wants engagement, time spent, clicks, comments, shares, return visits. Those goals make sense from a business perspective. The longer people stay, the more advertising they can see. The more often they return, the more valuable the platform becomes. Nobody has to sit in a room and say, let's make democracy worse. The system can move in that direction without anyone choosing that outcome directly. It only has to keep rewarding whatever holds attention. And emotional material holds attention. Fear, indignation, humiliation, conflict, the feeling that something is being taken away from you, the feeling that someone is getting away with something, the feeling that if you stop watching, you might miss the moment everything changes. That material travels. A careful explanation usually takes time. Outrage arrives fully formed. You don't need 3 minutes to understand the emotional instructions. You know what you're supposed to feel immediately. Jenny understood the surface story. She told me she didn't think the app had changed her political beliefs. That was important to her. She said, I was already worried about those people. And I believed her. That's the part that makes this issue difficult. The platform probably didn't create her concerns from nothing. She had family history, news habits, political experiences, and real grievances. She had reasons. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said the feed made those concerns feel present all the time. Not stronger exactly, closer. That's a different kind of influence. If you see something once a month, it occupies one place in your mental world. If you see it every day in slightly different forms, it starts to feel like the central fact of public life, the thing you need to monitor, the thing everyone else should be talking about, the thing that explains everything. Jenny wasn't saying the algorithm told me what to believe. She was saying the algorithm kept reminding me what to fear. That's a much harder claim to measure. And it's also much closer to how people experience these systems. They don't feel persuaded, they feel surrounded. The research here pulls in two different directions. Brookings summarizes evidence that Facebook's ranking system can reduce exposure to opposing viewpoints and increase polarization. It also cites a study in which people who stopped using Facebook for a month became less polarized on some policy issues. That matters because it suggests the platform may be doing more than reflecting existing divisions. If leaving the platform changes political attitudes, even modestly, then the system is part of the causal story. Not the whole story, but part of it. But then there's the counterweight. A Harvard Kennedy School study ran 3 large experiments involving 7,851 users. Researchers manipulated roughly 125,000 recommendations and observed around 26,000 platform interactions. They pushed recommendation systems in more extreme directions, and the effect on political attitudes was limited. That result complicates the popular story. It says that even when you change what people are recommended, you may not dramatically change what they believe. I want to pause there because this is where the public discussion often gets sloppy. There are two separate questions. First, can a platform change what people see? The answer seems clearly to be yes. Second, does changing what people see reliably change their political attitudes? The answer is much less clear, and those are not the same thing. A feed can change your media diet without changing your formal beliefs. It can change what feels urgent. It can change which political stories seem representative. It can change how often you encounter the most extreme version of another group. And you can still answer a survey question tomorrow the same way you answered it yesterday. That isn't a contradiction. It may, in fact, be the central fact. Jenny didn't change her party identification. She didn't adopt a new political philosophy. But she started describing opponents differently. They became less like people with bad ideas and more like a single hostile force. That shift is hard to capture with a question like, did your position change? The position may be stable. The emotional meaning around it may not be. And that brings us to the first wait, what moment? A system can have limited effects on measured attitudes while still changing the environment in which those attitudes are expressed. That sounds abstract, so let's make it ordinary. You open your phone before work, you check it during lunch, you scroll in bed. You see the same kind of conflict every time. You don't necessarily become more extreme, but politics starts to feel like a continuous emergency. Your family members seem more unreasonable. Your neighbors seem more threatening. Compromise starts to look like weakness. You may still hold the same beliefs you held 3 years ago. You just experience those beliefs inside a hotter room. And that changes how you behave. I wanted to understand the system from the other side, so I thought about creators. I'll call this archetype Ethan. Ethan makes political commentary online. He isn't a cartoon villain. He doesn't wake up thinking, how can I inflame the public today? He wants reach. He wants his work to matter. He wants people to watch long enough to understand what he's saying. At first, he makes careful videos. He explains the background. He presents two sides. He includes caveats. Those videos perform okay. Then he makes one video with a sharper title, a little more anger, a little less context. That video pops. So he tries it again. He starts using the language the audience responds to. This is insane. They don't want you to know this. Here's what they're hiding. The words are not necessarily false. That's what makes it work. They're just rearranged to trigger urgency before understanding. Ethan doesn't believe the platform is controlling him. He would reject that language. And I think he's right to reject it. He still has agency. He chooses what to make. He chooses how to frame it. He can stop. But he also knows what happens when he stops escalating. The measured videos get fewer views. The angry one spreads. The audience learns what kind of retention. The creator learns what kind of content earns distribution. The system learns what kind of content keeps people active. Then the loop tightens. Ethan described it to me this way. You don't become extreme all at once. You become more legible to the machine. That line helped me understand the problem. The platform doesn't need to change your belief. It can change what version of you gets rewarded. The version that explains, the version that mocks, the version that panics, the version that takes a complicated dispute and turns it into a moral emergency. And once that version performs better, it becomes easier to produce. Not because you've lost your mind, because you've received feedback. The system taught you what travels. So now I'm holding two pictures. In the first picture, users bring their preferences and platforms reflect them. In the second, platforms select and reward the material that keeps people engaged. Both pictures are true. That's the uncomfortable part. The user is not passive. The platform is not neutral. Those facts can exist at the same time. Here's the pattern I think is emerging. Recommendation systems may have more power over attention than over belief. They can make certain topics feel larger. They can make certain opponents feel more common. They can make certain emotions feel normal. They can make political life seem like a sequence of threats that require immediate response. That is influence. It just isn't always persuasion. I used to think the question was, did the algorithm change your mind? Now I think that question is too narrow. The better question might be, what did the algorithm make impossible for you to ignore? Because attention is not evenly distributed. Whatever receives your attention becomes part of your working reality. Not necessarily your whole reality, but the reality you're operating inside today. If every visit to a platform surfaces conflict, then conflict becomes the background condition. If every argument is presented through its most humiliating moments, then humiliation starts to seem like the normal language of politics. If every opposing group appears through its loudest representatives, Then the loudest representatives become the group. That may not move your vote. It may still change your trust. And trust is where the civic consequences begin. A democracy requires disagreement. It does not require everyone to like each other, but it does require some belief that other people are real, that institutions can function, and that disagreement does not automatically mean treason. A feed built around engagement has no obvious reason to preserve those beliefs. They are not always clickable. They don't produce immediate reaction. They are quiet conditions. You only notice them when they disappear. I wanted to think through this with someone who understood the system from inside. So I built another architect. I'll call her Priya. She works in product and engineering. Her job is to make recommendations more useful. That can mean showing people better music. It can mean helping them find communities. It can mean reducing irrelevant content. She believes personalization can be genuinely helpful. She also believes the platform should not pretend it's only a mirror. So we talked about metrics. A platform can measure whether a recommendation led to a click. It can measure whether someone watched for 30 seconds. It can measure whether they return the next day. But what does it measure when someone leaves the app feeling more suspicious of their neighbors? What metric captures a person becoming less willing to listen? What dashboard shows that politics has started to feel like an endless threat stream? Priya said, "We knew who clicked. We didn't know who stopped trusting." I wanted to push back because that can sound like a demand for impossible knowledge. Platforms can't measure every emotional or political consequences of every recommendation. And the Harvard study suggests we should be careful here. Maybe the attitude effects are smaller than people claim. Maybe most users are more stable than we assume. Maybe the most dramatic stories come from people who are already at the edge. Priya agreed with some of that. Then she said, limited impact is still impact if the system reaches billions of people every day. That wasn't a complete answer, but it was a fair challenge. We often talk about effects as if they must be dramatic to matter. The system either radicalizes you or it does nothing. A recommendation either changes your vote or it is harmless. But most systems don't work that cleanly. They alter probabilities. They adjust what you encounter. They change the cost of finding one kind of information and the ease of finding another. They make some emotions available at the top of the feed and others harder to reach. Small shifts can accumulate, or maybe they might not. That uncertainty is real. And I don't want to erase it because the stronger story is more dramatic. The evidence does not let us say that algorithms brainwash everyone. It doesn't even let us say that extreme recommendations reliably transform political attitudes. But it does give us reasons to question the idea that these systems are merely reflecting what users already want. The full picture is less cinematic than a conspiracy. There is no central command deciding exactly what every person should believe. There doesn't need to be. There is a business model. There are ranking systems. There are creators responding to feedback. There are users responding to one another. There are political actors who know what emotional content spreads. And there are institutions that benefit from pretending this arrangement is simpler than it is. The common understanding persists for several reasons. It is psychologically comfortable. If the problem is human tribalism, then the platform is only a tool. The responsibility sits with the users. It is politically convenient. If the platform is just reflecting society, then changing the platform will not solve anything. And it is analytically simple. It is easier to say people are divided than to trace how identity, attention, interface design, commercial incentives, and repeated exposure reinforce one another. But once you look at the pieces together, the mirror metaphor starts to fail. A mirror reflects whatever stands in front of it. A recommendation system decides what enters the room. It decides what appears first. It decides what comes back tomorrow. It decides which creator is rewarded for staying calm and which creator is rewarded for escalating. That doesn't give the system total control. It gives the system a role in shaping the conditions. Here's the complexity paradox. The platform may be less powerful than critics claim in one sense, and more powerful than users realize in another. It may be weak at changing settled opinions. It may be strong at changing the emotional atmosphere around those opinions. It may not tell you what to think. It may influence what feels worth thinking about. It may make the most inflammatory opponents easier to find. It may not create your distrust. It may keep presenting evidence that seems to justify it. That's enough to make democratic life harder. Not because everyone becomes a fanatic, because ordinary people begin treating politics as a threat detection exercise. You wake up and look for danger. You see a clip, you see a response, you see a counter response. You see someone being publicly punished for saying the wrong thing. You see a claim that demands immediate attention. By evening, you have not necessarily learned more, you have rehearsed alarm. An alarm has consequences. It changes how you talk to family. It changes whether you trust a journalist. It changes whether you believe institutions can be repaired. It changes whether another person's disagreement feels like information or betrayal. That is what I mean by the emotional conditions of democracy. The system does not have to convert you. It may simply have to make cooperation feel naive. So, what do we do with this? I want to offer a clean answer. I don't have one. There are obvious individual responses. You can follow more deliberate sources. You can stop treating the feed as a representative sample of public opinion. You can ask why something appeared. You can look for the full clip. You can notice when a story makes you angry before it gives you enough information to understand it. Those habits may help, but they have limits. Individual users are trying to navigate a system designed by teams with more data, more testing, and more knowledge of human intention than any one person can possess. Just be more careful is not a serious structural solution. At the same time, broad reforms are difficult. What would transparency actually reveal? What should platforms optimize for? How do you audit a ranking system without giving bad actors a map? How do you reduce inflammatory content without suppressing legitimate dissent? How do you measure civic health? These are not simple questions, but the investigation changes the questions we should be asking. Instead of asking whether a platform changes attitudes, we should ask what it changes around attitudes. What does it make visible? What does it make repetitive? What does it make emotionally expensive to ignore? What kind of speech receives reach? What kinds of people become symbols? Which forms of disagreement become impossible to imagine without contempt? The practical question for the listener is more personal. When you think about the other side, where did that picture come from? A conversation, a book, a direct experience, or a steady stream of highly edited examples selected because they produced a reaction? That doesn't mean your judgment is wrong. It means your evidence may be filtered, and so is everyone's. The point is not to become neutral. Neutrality is not always possible, and it isn't always desirable. The point is to understand the difference between having a belief and having a belief repeatedly activated by a system that profits from activation. Those are different experiences. They can feel identical from inside your head. I started with the idea that the feed was a mirror. I still think that metaphor explains part of what happens. People bring identity, fears, loyalties, and grievances with them. Algorithms did not invent political division. They did not create every conflict, they amplify. And the best experimental evidence does not support the strongest version of the claim that extreme recommendations reliably change everyone's political beliefs. That matters. We should not exaggerate what the research shows, but we also shouldn't use that caution to pretend the system is passive. A mirror doesn't decide what enters the frame. A mirror doesn't learn which image keeps you staring. A mirror doesn't reward the person who makes the reflection more frightening. The feed does. Maybe the most important effect is not that it tells us what to believe. Maybe it tells us what deserves our emotional energy. That distinction made me uneasy because it means I can remain intellectually consistent while becoming emotionally distorted. I can hold the same political opinions I held 5 years ago while seeing the other side as more dangerous. I can say the algorithm didn't change my mind while admitting that it changed what I encountered every day. I can recognize the incentives and still depend on them. I can understand the system and still scroll. That may be the real condition we're living in. Partial agency, partial influence, no clean bad guy, and no clean escape. Jenny was right that the feed did not create her concerns. She was also right that it made those concerns feel closer. Ethan was right that he chose his own words. He was also right that some words travel further than others. Priya was right that the evidence does not prove total control. She was also right that a system can matter without controlling anyone completely. The feed is not a mirror. It is not a puppet master either. It's more like a room that keeps rearranging itself around whatever holds your attention. And after a while, you may forget that the room moved. I'm Carl Kim. This is Interconnected.